Thanks, Jordan. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Wonderful. So, thanks all. Over the next 20 25 minutes, I'll talk around how organizations are undergoing a transformational change right now. And this was happening even before COVID. So, things have really been significantly shaken post COVID. And essentially, consumer behavior has changed and has been changing dramatically over the last 10, 15 years. There is a much greater preference for experiences over assets. Globalization has changed the way organizations produce and consume. And there are now so many channels. Customers expect goods and services in their preferred channels. Time to market has become extremely critical. So over the next 20 minutes, what I hope to do is to share some insights based on my conversation with a whole bunch of organizations around their priorities and what they see as their primary motivations as they look at automation. And also, I'll share some thoughts around how it has influenced our own platform journey. So I hope to do this, talk through this over the next 20, 25 minutes. And probably the last 5, 10 minutes, we can probably have a Q&A. So in terms of, just to set the context, clearly automation has gone well beyond cost efficiency. And in fact, increasingly organizations are talking around how it can help deliver better customer experience, how journeys can be much better. And and this has been a dominant trend over multiple years, where whether it's in the front office or in the back office, the whole goal is how do you improve the experience. A second key aspect is how do you create more additional business capability so that organizations can change faster to the needs of their customers, how they can turn on the dime, like the remote working experience that COVID has demanded from us. A third piece is in terms of technology being central to business strategy. So one aspect of it is the spends are increasing. Excuse me. But even more importantly, is the close tie-in or the alignment that is required between business strategy and digital experiences, and technology is central to this. The last piece, which is kind of obvious, is operational efficiency. The key point I want to drive out here is that many organizations have seen very material changes based on initial journeys, and this has given organizations a lot more motivation to go all in towards towards a more holistic automation. As we look at this, I think a key part is, rather than look at automation and artificial intelligence as two separate pieces that kind of come together, it is important that we look at a convergence between these two to achieve the maximum benefits that can be accrued. And the key adjectives that I'd like to talk about here are the ones that are there at the bottom of the slide, which is how do I make businesses far more agile, ability to launch new products, new services, to turn very quickly based on business priorities. A second piece is how do I drive hyper productivity in the back end? This could mean significantly reducing my cost structure so that I'm able to target new markets. This could be how do I crunch down cycle times so that if something used to take days earlier, can I do that in minutes? Which essentially means that your ability, using this, you have greater ability to offer a whole variety of new products and services. A third piece is how can I drive consistency? And in some sense, the more consistent my execution engine is, the more experimental I can become on the front end. The last piece is scalability. Again, a key aspect here is as you start the journey, as in any other area, you're going to start small. But once you start seeing benefits, you want to have the ability to dramatically scale up. And and we have seen organizations that we have worked with start, take the initial tentative steps, build their capacity, and once they feel comfortable, they scale up rapidly, both in the AI around bots, RPA or otherwise, and other traditional automation techniques, and likewise in AI, they start leveraging AI more and more in a strategic fashion. And what this means is that from a workforce perspective, we are seeing a new kind of workforce emerge. And this does not mean that as technology and AI gets more powerful, this means human workers start playing a more specialized role, leveraging what are very uniquely human attributes. A couple of them, and I'm sure there's a lot more, is the innovation, the creativity, and the empathy that human workers can bring in, while digital workers can focus around aspects around driving significant productivity, driving consistency, as in how can we make sure that work, as you drive the optimization engine, how can we continue to drive further and further efficiency out of a particular process. And as you can kind of take the burden of consistency and mundane work out, you free up time for the human workers to try out, experiment, check out new possibilities. And this goes back to how does this digital human twin, if you will, how do they deliver on the end customer expectations? Customers who want a more personalized customer journey, they want goods and services to be completely aligned to their specific needs and at a 10x price performance. So this is a slide which we kind of drew out to say if we had to reach an end state, what would that be? And that is something that we call as automation singularity. That is a holy grail, if you will, but that's the point at which you have your human workers are working in complete concert with their digital resources. Humans are able to focus primarily on driving a great customer experience, providing empathy, and thinking through the new innovations which are possible. And you are driving significant cost takeouts and consistent output from the bots. So if you look at these key components, the deterministic automation is pretty clear. This is what had been happening for quite some time in the past. But as we look at the next two categories, when you look at intelligent automation, this clearly is going a lot beyond just calling a particular a document extraction or calling a cloud-based service for sentiment analysis. This at the fundamental level, one aspect that this includes is the role of data and using data as a central resource for making a whole bunch of decisions. And when we say data, we are really talking about data which is at the process level. You want to understand what is happening in this process on an end-to-end basis. You want very granular level understanding of individual tasks. And likewise, you want to know how the resources are being used. In fact, what we have found with many customers is they do have a good sense of what their process is, but as we start drilling deeper into it, questions emerge around, are there really so many variations? Or I didn't realize that in this particular process, we actually use the system, and that might probably be a compliance issue. I shouldn't be really using that. And those issues emerge. If we want to go down an automation journey, we believe the first step to do is to understand where you are, what is the variations that are there that you're currently having. If you're looking at bottlenecks, you want to have a much better sense around what your real bottlenecks are, what your SLAs, if you will, for your process are, what drives customer satisfaction and customer desire. And if I were to simulate, if I were to make the following interventions using automation, using AI, does it drive the end goal for me? And here a key aspect is to look at the process on a holistic basis, look at individual tasks, and in multiple cases, we find that as you get more granular, there are a lot more insights that get uncovered in terms of, can I just re-engineer this process? Is this approval really required? And or should it be automated? If it should be automated, what's the best way to automate it? And again, fundamentally, it all comes down to a bedrock of data on which everything rests. The second piece is how you stitch together humans and bots. Because clearly, in any end-to-end process, there will be certain roles which can get automated. There'll be certain areas where you will have AI components to help take decisions. But finally, there'll be a significant role for human experts to step in. And unless we can kind of stitch together journey seamlessly between human experts and bot engines, what you have is optimization, which is created in, or rather, what you have is suboptimal outcomes because you have automated in pockets, but the end-to-end journey has not really changed. And a lot of ROI that you expected are not being realized. And this again is one of those things that we see in many organizations who have invested in many automation tools. They find that the initial POCs seem to be delivering results because when they did the POCs, they applied it in narrow pockets. But once they decided to scale it up, the expectation is that if I achieved some benefits in these two or three processes as I scale it up, I should start seeing benefits both in terms of process outcomes and in terms of reduced human effort. And you actually don't find that because you end up that the bottleneck has just moved from one place to the next. Humans are now required to solve those bottlenecks. Whereas if you start with the overall process view and then start looking at where the interventions are most optimal, you are able to drive much better outcomes. When it comes likewise to AI, we believe there's a lot more potential in when you're looking at leveraging this data. There is this human in the loop, whereby if there are exceptions, you route it to a human and then take the feedback so that you drive a continuously improving cycle. Likewise, when it comes to documents, a whole bunch of information is trapped in documents. One part of this is extracting the information from the documents. Another equally challenging area but so much potential, and we have seen organizations benefit a lot from this, is the ability to derive semantic meaning from these documents and take calls around how to proceed. For example, for a particular organization which was doing M&A activity, they wanted to review a whole bunch of documents from the target organization and see what are the risks that they're getting into. So one of the solutions that was built was basically going through all these documents, looking at potential risk areas and flagging it up. So this was one of those classic leveraging a human in the loop, where the AI engine is doing a significant amount of activity in terms of identifying what all needs to be reviewed. And then it's shared with a human expert who, rather than looking through thousands and thousands of documents, is able to focus his attention on a few set of documents and intervene. So we were able to crunch down we were able to crunch down the effort involved, reduce the cycle time to kind of enable the M&A decision to be taken. And most importantly, we believe that by providing focus to a small set of documents, we were able to improve the quality of the exercise. The third and the last piece when it comes to autonomous journeys is really complete context awareness. And here we are talking about if you know what your end objective is it to reduce cost? Is it to improve uh, profitability? Is it to drive a customer satisfaction goal? Can you autonomously take some decisions? This could mean that your uh, customer interactions can be dynamic. The engine automatically makes decisions around running some experiments, probably making certain fields optional for certain classes of users for certain products because they might not be as relevant. And this is typically structured whereby the process designer still retains full control. He can take a decision around whether he wants certain kind of experiments to be taken, or he might decide that for particular compliance reasons, certain rules will be hard coded, certain forms cannot be changed, whereby he's more comfortable allowing certain other forms to naturally evolve. So, what we see is what starts off being a static process in the beginning moves towards becoming more intelligent in the second stage, and then in the third stage moves into a continuous improvement cycle, whereby in some sense in the end goal you just want to tell the system, if you will, that these are the three outcomes that I want to achieve, these are my constraints, do what you will. And it decides in terms of which SLAs are more important, how does it allocate it to resources, and moves tasks between queues to kind of achieve those end outcomes. Obviously, this is a high aspiration, but we believe that We are probably reaching this faster in certain areas than in others, but it's clearly it's a great aspiration for the industry to go to. Here, this is just a little more deep dive into the what we just spoke about in intelligence. I don't want to kind of walk through every single piece, other than just to say that you typically start off with a base level of AI, and over time you start identifying certain areas where you think AI has a greater role, can deliver greater value, and start focusing in those areas specifically. And most organizations, we find that there are certain business areas where they have moved to level 3 or level 4 in terms of capability, whereas in other processes and business areas, they are happy leaving it at level 2 because that's in line with your priority. Another key thing is when we have these discussions with stakeholders, it is important to kind of set expectations around the fact that typically this is a journey. You do not move to higher levels right off. You want to start simple, start building capacity to deliver these outcomes, and also in terms of how do you communicate with stakeholders around the fact that there might not be consistency might not be as easy when it comes to AI as it was in more deterministic automation. There is inherent fuzziness. Likewise, concepts around explainability become more important. So it's a bit of a learning in terms of as you move up these levels. What we have seen in terms of business outcomes as we go down this path is we have found that customer satisfaction can be lifted in significant and dramatic fashion. And this comes in terms of the ability to respond faster to a customer need. In certain areas, it has been that it's a first call resolution or your ability to handle customers in the channel of preference. Likewise, from a productivity, we're really talking about not incremental change, but a 10x jump in price performance, which really, as we spoke earlier, allows you to offer a different set of products and services vis-a-vis what could have been delivered earlier. A third piece is in terms of building resilience and agility. One aspect is a reduction in cycle time. Another piece that we have seen, and quite personally within our own organization and with partners, is our ability to change dramatically in terms of an execution model with very little break, ability to continue delivering these services in these COVID times. And the last piece, which obviously matters to all of us, is while cost is something that is expected from automation, we are also looking at how we can drive revenue growth. And this is something that has come from research. And we have also experienced this in our interactions with our customers, where we have been able to deliver these business benefits at varying levels. In terms of the key elements of how we look at automation, we broadly look at three broad pieces. The first is an element around how do we to understand the current state and get a good sense. And as I'd spoken, data is very central to this conversation. The second piece is the element of execution, automation, leveraging AI is a key part of this. And the third piece is how do you drive acceleration in terms of how do you orchestrate the overall process and improve the journey on an almost continuous basis, which might mean that there are two elements out here. The first piece is how do you move work artifacts from human to system, or between humans or between systems. It could be any of these combinations. And clearly we anticipate that as we move more and more towards an autonomous journey, this would be dynamic. There would be certain scenarios where it could be a systemic decision to move a work artifact from one resource to another, or in certain cases even from bots to humans or humans to bots, if that's what makes sense. Uh, and the second piece is in terms of how do you stitch the pieces together? How do you leverage AI so that your process is not static? It is constantly evolving, it is improving. And if you have a new optimization function or a new business goal, if you will, how do you kind of adapt your the resources that you have and kind of build in a new SOP so that you can kind of optimize onto that. And some learnings, and these are some of these are things that we have learned the hard way. Some of and In terms of conversations of making this successful. The first key part is whenever you talk about a grand goal of an automation like this, is you want to start off with defining what your objectives are, and oftentimes it is not just cost. It could be cost, it could be a revenue lift, it could be customer satisfaction. And likewise, from a roadmap perspective, you want to make sure that you have a broad roadmap that is defined, which is which addresses these key priorities, and which is something that can be easily understood by a large variety of stakeholders, and then define more short-term programs which dovetail into this broader roadmap. Oftentimes, what happens is there's a temptation that you find some low-hanging fruits and you want to target an automation towards that, which is absolutely valid because you do want to gain the experience, you do want to score these short-term wins. I guess the key point I'm making here is that you want to make sure that they fit into a broader program. You don't want to optimize in areas where you're just shifting the bottleneck, or where by making these changes, there is no change into the end outcome. The second piece, again, extremely important, is how do you drive communication across the various stakeholder groups? And the stakeholder groups will include uh, the business, the customer facing units. It would include technology units. It would include operations. And lastly, and this is something that we have learned, is teams which deal with audit and compliance, especially when it comes to areas like AI. The need to kind of ensure auditability, ethical conduct, and making sure that there is some degree of consistency is very important. Change management, again, extremely critical. I would think that having the right people, building the expertise and capacity is important. Creating structures within your organization to make sure that you have the right kind of governance. Certain organizations create COEs to kind of institutionalize this capability. They have organized programs to identify uh, priorities, identify candidates for automation, identify key risks, etc. That's important. And then finally, the technology platforms which are required to support this. One key belief that we have is when you're looking at technology platforms, you want to make sure you have open architectures, because clearly there is so much of evolution in terms of business priorities. There is so much of innovation happening out there. So you want to make sure that you're open enough to absorb all these changes. Last part is, as you move into from pilots to scaling up, you want to be very proactive and address risks in a very transparent fashion. One of the things that we have identified, which has worked quite well for us, is identifying what could go wrong. Lay it out in a risk register, define out what are the mitigants. And once you kind of share this thing out and say, if these are the things that could go wrong, this is the controls that we want to put, these might be the residual risks, and are you as a business comfortable taking this? It makes for a much more mature conversation, and organizations are able to move from that uneasy feeling towards a much better handle around the risks that they're undergoing. So these are the learnings that we had. Happy to answer questions.
Hi, Guha. It looks like we do have two questions from the audience. Our first
Okay.
one is from Dave Sackett, and he wants to know, when will AI voice assistant bots help in business applications?
Well, so, we have seen that they have already started playing a role in a few customers, but they have not been as impactful in business scenarios as it was envisaged in the past. So we have seen some of our customers starting experiments around this, and some of them have been successful. I think there is a certain market which prefers voice-based assistance vis-a-vis other channels. And I guess as they start, as the consistency and the quality of responses improve on the voice channel, I'm sure there is going to be a market that is, there is going to be a customer segment which would prefer that channel vis-a-vis the others. in our interactions, we have found that there are certain channels which do prefer an internet channel, and there are others which have a very strong preference for a chat or an email channel. And in fact, in one customer segment, even the organization was kind of keen to kind of make sure that they do not lose the voice channel because they felt it was extremely important to build customer empathy. So I hope that helps, Steve.
For anyone else that has questions, I do just want to let them know that they can submit their questions in the Q&A box on the right-hand side of the screen. All they have to do, if they're a first-time submitter, is type in their question and include their name and then hit send. We do have another question from Tom Naylor. He wants to know about the 4 tiers of automation, and he wanted to know if you had any real-world examples of companies operating at that level 4.
When we say 4 tiers, are you talking about the intelligent automation, Jordan?
I believe so. I'm going to speak on behalf of Tom and say that I believe there was a slide in there talking about the 4 tiers of automation, and that level 4 being the most advanced. Could you provide any real world examples of companies operating at such a mature level?
So I had 5 tiers. Level 5 was the most advanced, but there are other charts which have this, which have autonomous journey at level 4. I presume Tom was speaking about that. To be honest, level for me, the autonomous journey is more end goal as an aspiration that we want to move towards. We have seen organizations approach pretty close to that in certain areas, but not across the board. For example, I have seen organizations build this capability to auto-correct their automations and change their design in a dynamic fashion, but they typically tend to be narrow, specialized pockets, not across the board.
Are you able
But
to
it's a
share?
great aspiration for us to go to. Sorry, Jordan, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, are you able to share of any companies that have succeeded in any particular pocket?
Well, certain organizations have been able to especially well in the area of customer onboarding. That's an area where I have seen quite a bit of progress. Likewise, in technology on the IT side, ticket resolution and auto correction, again, I've seen significant progress. These are 2 areas that I can talk to.
I'm mindful that we only have a minute left, but I do want to ask you one more question. Given the disruption caused by COVID, how are enterprises changing plans and redrawing the automation roadmap to deal with this new normal?
That's an interesting question, Jordan. So what we have seen is when we speak to our customers, when we interact with them, we find that there are probably 3 broad categories. There are the drivers. There is clearly one set of customers who have done even better in COVID than in the past. So they are doubling down on the investments, moving more aggressively towards digital, improving their customer, driving better customer journeys. There are sustainers who are kind of operating in the mode where they have to balance building customer journeys with cost controls, and they have a slightly different approach towards this. And thirdly, there are the strugglers who are kind of barely trying to stay alive and survive through these tough times. I think their response has been uh, oftentimes their response has been a lot more towards the cost side than around managing a customer relationship. But we believe that once we are past this period, I guess by the middle of next year, I believe that the agenda will again swing back towards a primary focus around customer journeys, with cost, etc., being important, but not as important as the as driving a great customer experience.
We do have one more question, and I feel bad to ignore them, so I'm just going to go ahead and let you do it because we do have a tiny bit of time in between our next session. Steve Wasner wants to know, the governance group seems to be a key to successful automation. What are the key elements to setting this group up?
Well, what we have seen is one primary thing to make governance successful is an endorsement from senior leadership that they need to be fully committed and backing this. So I would think that support is something which is extremely critical. Second is from a governance perspective, they need to have participation and linkages with the whole variety of stakeholders that I had spoken. which would include the business, which would include operations, technology, and risk and compliance. And third is people with the right kind of expertise to kind of contribute meaningfully across the board. I think these would be the top three in my mind.
I think that's a great succinct piece of advice, considering I feel like we could take all day to talk about setting up governance structures, and like that's a really deep topic. So I think that those are great, three great starting points. Guha, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. I'm very glad that you kicked off our main day 2. I want to